And so I think we're in this, like you mentioned, this loneliness of parenting and feeling like I have to do it all and I need to do it perfectly because social media is gonna, is like I need to post it, I need to post my life. And then so there's like this cycle of pressure, this added pressure. It's just not healthy.
Welcome to Mom Mentality, your virtual village of support. I'm Jessica Campbell, your family wellness coach, and I am committed to helping you prioritize your and your family's well-being. This podcast will be like your favorite ladies group chat come to life. We'll share the ups and downs of life for moms just like you, get real advice from coaches and experts, and I'll pop in with my own stories and tips on everyday challenges to the big questions. Whether you're juggling work from home, balancing adult life with parenthood, tackling ADHD, yours or your kids, or just trying to catch a breath, Mom Mentality is your spot.
Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. The first thing I'm going to ask you is if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I am a longtime Montessori teacher turned parent coach that really just helps and supports parents that are parenting or raising their children during this modern day and age, just to break any cycles of frustration, yelling, guilt that they might be stuck in, and just to become, calm leaders for their children, just to have better tools and systems and strategies to interact and communicate with their children. I'm a mom myself, so I know what it's like to balance different developmental stages, and every child's so different and unique, and you must feel like you have to parent them differently. So I just like to have that safe container for parents to just really kind of unpack anything that they might feel is holding them back from being the parents that they want to be for their children.
I love that. Can you I had looked into a Montessori preschool back when my oldest was little. Can you just give us like a brief description of that for those who don't know the philosophies behind Montessori?
Sure. Let me see. It's a lot. So let me try to just pack it in. The brief story was an Italian doctor, first woman in Italy over 100 years ago. Because she had that medical background, she really was an observer. And so she spent a lot of time observing children, and she created this philosophy based on really with children that no one really knew what to do with them. They were just learning different children. And back then there wasn't a lot of resources. So she really focused on creating an environment where children could learn through their hands, through hands-on experiences, and just fostering independence and self-care and building that autonomy in that space. So there's so much more to her philosophy,
Right.
but that's I think the most accurate kind of understanding of her philosophy that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right. Right. I know it was kind of new to me as a new mom. I didn't know anything about that. And I live in a community it's a very widespread community of different views. And so in my community, there's a heavy Christian base, but there's also a very heavy Maharishi base. And so it was at the Maharishi school. And so it was, I guess, unexpected to look into a place that doesn't necessarily align with the same thing because they are on such different ends of the spectrum. And there's so many different cultures within my community. So it was something that I definitely liked the idea, but I didn't get too in depth on. I just was like, oh, this preschool seems nice. Well, they do these things, but it's often not, especially in situations like that, it might not be looked into very deep. So that's why I wanted to ask in case anyone didn't know that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of times when people will be like, "What is that? Like, is
Right.
it religious or is it a cult even? Like, what is?"
Right. Even after like all this time, it's still something that, obviously needs more communication around. From Montessori teacher to parent coach, what kind of inspired that journey?
Yeah. So, and I probably should have mentioned, you can find Montessori schools on pretty much every continent. Like they're very much internationally recognized. And really, so how my journey and I was a teacher, a Montessori teacher. I was trained. So the way Montessori is grouped, it's grouped by ages. So my early childhood training was from ages 2.5 to 6. And then my elementary one training was from ages 6 to 9. So I started in that early childhood, way before I had children. And so I was really just learning. I was naturally always drawn to children. Like I was a babysitter in college, and I always had cousins and stuff that I would take care of. But so I was comfortable around children and it came naturally to me. But that observation piece that I mentioned, that Maria Montessori, just observing, I think a lot of times as adults, we like to step in, right? Like we have good intentions. We want to help, we want to fix, we want to show, right? But that like stepping back and just watching is really where I just started to discover so much more beyond what I had known around children. So I continued, I worked in New York City in a Montessori schools there, which is free. We had the best field trips ever.
I actually am from New York. I was born there. And like, that's what I said. I was like, we don't get in Iowa now, we don't get the kind of field trips I used to get back in the day.
Oh my God, they were wonderful. Carnegie Hall, the New York Ballet, I mean, museums galore. It was just like, our 16 students holding onto the rope, getting in and off the subways, and it was just a lot of fun. And then I eventually moved down to Florida, and that's when I decided to pursue my 6 to 9 training, which was more that elementary age. And that was around the time where I got pregnant with my oldest son. So I think having that experience going into parenting was definitely helpful, but having your own children is completely a different story. It was completely eye-opening to me to see. And at that time, my husband was in grad school, a lot of solo parenting at the time. And so I just felt like everything around me needed to change, right? Like everything was like working against me. I was exhausted. I was teaching. I had a new baby. My husband was working late. And it was just like, oh, it was so overwhelming. But what I realized is like I needed to really do some work and make some changes and recognize where I was maybe showing up short, or I was just, falling into this thought pattern of everything against me versus what I can kind of look to lead me into a more positive direction. So I continued working, and I would say like around the pandemic, well, even before that, I started, in my teaching career, I would have parent teacher conferences. And obviously, parents wanted to know, like, well, what can I do to support my child at home? What are some things that work in the classroom that I could, learn? Because depending on where their background was, maybe they didn't just have that experience with children or understand the child development. And so obviously I would spend time helping them create chores at home or create an environment at home that was more cohesive to fostering that independence and that autonomy. But there was like not enough time, right, to really help and support them. You only get like 20-25 minutes of parent teacher conference time. So that kind of led me to the pandemic, where I really got to see what was going on. I'll never forget, I had an ER doctor. He was the head of the hospital at the ER department, and he would kind of linger after the Zoom calls, and he would say, "Miss Michelle, this is the hardest thing in the world. Just trying to support his 6-year-old to do school at home and just, balance everything." And so that's kind of what led me to start my own business and really just provide that bridge between home and school and just supporting parents that are very much, well-intentioned parents, but are just needing more resource, maybe understanding some systems they can put in place and to just be that leader for their children. So that's kind of where I am now. And so I do take a lot of the Montessori philosophy and things that I can help parents really incorporate in their home.
I love that. I love that. That sounds super well-rounded. I actually am currently working as a para virtually. And so that is one of the things that I see a lot, and I have such a like craving to, like you said, we want to step in. I want to like fix it, and I have to make sure like I tread lightly on those things. But like so often, I want to be able to kind of like wiggle my way in there and help. And they actually have hired me as a parent coach, but there's not a lot of reach out yet. And especially being in the para space and being in the virtual space, there tends to be a lot of, I mean, I would say families like I grew up in, which have a lot of trauma, a lot of, things going on. And, so there's a part of me that's kind of how this podcast came to be too, is like the generational patterns and helping moms, because there has been such like, if you look back and you connect the dots, there's been such a different approach. And a lot of times we don't know how to fix it. And so, or like work on it, or we don't know the direction to go. And so that's been part of where I've been at too, is like, I want to try to help these parents who are trying to get their kids to do things at home. But now I'm in the high school realm. So these kids, you can't force anybody to do anything. So like teaching them to build that connection has been something that I've been aiming to work on, because I think we all could use a little bit more support when it comes, like you said, it's a whole different thing when it's your own kid versus when you're helping a classroom of students at any age. It's totally different when it's your own.
Absolutely. And like you said, like there's so many things that come up emotionally that maybe your child doing or did that like it's at a subconscious level that
Mhm.
is triggering something inside of you that hasn't healed. And I always say, our children really hold up that mirror on the work that we haven't healed. And that's something I learned early on in my parenting. And so I like to support parents to work through that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's always there as long as you're willing to hear it. Like if you sit back and really reflect on it, there you'll find something, because that's just the way it is. Like we all have something. And I had a conversation with my dad, and him and I don't really see eye to eye on how parenting should be. But I had said to him, someday my kids are going to grow up and they're going to be like, Mom, you didn't do this right, or you could have supported me better in that way. And I'm going to be like, okay, well, I did the best I could. So now you go and support your kids in that way and just start to change the dynamics that way. I'm like, I got to work on the things that I knew I needed my kids to get away from. And then you'll work on the things that you want your kids to get away from. That's kind of how these patterns play out and change. So when we had talked prior, you said that your household is 3 boys?
Yes, I have an 18-year-old, an almost 16-year-old, and a 10-year-old, all boys.
How does what does your household dynamic look like with all boys? I have all girls.
Oh,
I have 3 girls, and they're all young. Like, my oldest is 8 this week, so they're all girls, but yeah.
sure. Well, like currently it crossed between a frat house and wrestling match, lots of balls flying around. It's very so the older two are 2 years apart, and then there's a 5-year gap in between my middle son and my youngest. But my youngest, who's super sensitive, is like the old soul. He's like the 30-year-old. So he's grown up way so fast because having obviously two older brothers. So yeah, my house is very loud. It's very loud. It's very alive. I keep telling my husband we're gonna miss this one day. And I think I mentioned to you that before I jumped on the call, I was actually filling out my oldest senior ad, the little ads you put at the back of the yearbook. And so I've just been going through the ups and downs of his senior year as far as my emotions, right? Like wrapping this all up in a bow of like this time that he's here. Like we're approaching the holidays and he'll be here next year, but it's gonna look different, right? It's gonna feel different. He has plans to go away for college. So I'm soaking it all up right now. The messy, the stinky, non-stop eating, like lots of sports. I'm soaking it all up because I know it's gonna look different. And I know that's it's both exciting. I always say it's like the beautiful, awful phase of parenting because it's both exciting, but it's also very nostalgic at the same time.
Right.
Right.
Well, in the interest of nostalgia and your oldest getting ready to leave, can you share one really hard moment that you've had and one really great moment that you've had in parenting, whether just with him or just in general?
For sure. I think in this phase where I am now, I guess I could speak because it's the most current. It's just really learning um to step back, right? Like just to take some steps back. I would say that my family, like my mom and my her sisters, my aunts, we're very close knit family. All the women, I would say, my grandmother, we come from a long line of worriers, like just worrying, like catastrophizing, like everything's gonna go to the worst case scenario, right? So, and I never really realized that that was like became part of me until my children like became teenagers and well, a little bit when they were younger. I guess I would, I think as parents, you're always worried for their safety, right? But, as like for him, he's starting to, she's driving on his own and we're working on the speed and like certain things that obviously you're as a parent, your mind just goes to like, well, the worst case scenario. And so I think, he turned 18 in September. And I think the biggest challenge to answer your question was just really stepping back and trusting and believing that he's got it. Like it's that thought work of knowing that the worries and the thoughts that kind of pop in your head are not true. Like they're what ifs. They're not factuals, right? Like and just knowing that not that he's not gonna make mistakes. Like obviously he's a teenager. He's a young adult. His brain's not fully developed. But just trusting that he's going to keep himself safe. He's going to make decisions that aren't going to put him in harm's way or put him in a situation that could completely change his life, right? Like those are the things that obviously as parents you kind of focus on too much. And so that has been, I think, an area for me that I've grown in that has been a challenge of seeing more of what's going well instead of pointing out, oh, you were speeding. Like I got the notification you were speeding. We're still gonna have a conversation about that, but that's not gonna be like the first thing I say when I see
Right.
it.
Do they get their license at 18 there?
Actually, in Florida, you can get your license at 16.
So I wondered because in Iowa, you can get your permit to drive with your parents or a licensed adult at 14, and then you get your license at 16. And I've been having this like weird thought that keeps coming to my head, even though my daughter's only 8. I'm like, in 6 years, she's gonna get behind the wheel of a car. That's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get your permit at 15 here and then your license at 16.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm like, who decided that was a smart thing to do to put children that have underdeveloped brains?
Right. Car accidents are so common, yet you can't smoke a cigarette, for example, or drink alcohol till you're like 21, but you can get behind a motor vehicle when you're that young? What?
Yeah.
Wild.
That's
What has been, this is a fun question I just threw in here. What has been one of the funniest moments you've had as a parent with your boys?
funniest. Um, Gosh, I feel like we have so many. My husband's very playful nature, very loud. I think that's why we have a loud house.
I resonate. I'm very
Yeah.
loud. My family's very loud.
So there's always this, there's a lot of like they're all athletes. There's a lot of sports talking and kind of locker room talk, borderline. And so there's just always jokes. There's always laughter. There's always like kind of making fun of each other. Like, so being the only female, right? I've had to learn, even though I grew up with all boys, like my cousins were mostly all boys. I was always kind of like a tomboy. Like I had boys that were friends or friends that were boys more than girls. So it was always like okay with it, but obviously there's a limit, right? Like we're not gonna say certain things. So I feel like it's like every day.
Right.
There's always something funny. There's always something to talk about. There always, I don't know. I would say that I think it's something that my husband and I are really proud of, like, especially my middle son. He's like our fun guy. Like he can switch to play like so quickly, even if it's like a heat of the moment situation, like he will switch. And so he's just ready for a wrestle. He's ready for like, my husband tackling it or something just crazy. And so before you know it, like there's things flying around and they're playing around and then it's just turns into a good time. But yeah, I think we definitely prioritize play and laughter and just lightheartedness in my house. And I hope that those memories, like that, I hope that they can take that with them into adulthood. You know what I mean? I feel like sometimes we become adults and we lose that fun, that lightheartedness, and we get into just the cycle of working, and we lose that part of us. So I hope that that stays with them,
Right.
and we can, like you said, pass it to the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a lot of fun in your house. How, if you look back, on just your entire journey of parenting, how have you, and we could say Montessori or no Montessori, how have you created that culture in your household? Like what did that journey look like for you to maintain that kind of a culture or build it up when they were young?
I think, like I can just share with you, like I was literally writing up the ad for the yearbook and just going back to when he was a little boy and just, I just kind of drafted it out. I'm like, you've always, everything that has come your way, you've accomplished it with such determination and like adventure and like sense of humor, like all the things that you would hope your child would have, right? Going into adulthood. And I think that the environment, the home environment is where that all started very early on. And just, my oldest is always very hyper focused on like doing things with like new skills I'm talking about, like quickly and like with focus. And I think it's because I didn't interrupt, right? Like if I would have stepped in a lot, then I break that. Like even, Maria Montessori says the work of a child is play, right? And so just letting things like my children had chores since they were like 2 or 3, and they were very developmentally appropriate. But I think it instilled in them work ethic, time management, planning, a lot of those executive functioning skills that helped them develop along the way. And not only that, but building confidence within themselves that they can do anything they really want to do. And I think that comes from creating that environment within the home and trusting, right? Like trusting that they're climbing on something high. Yes, that's terrifying sometimes. Hey, let me know if you need a hand, or are you doing okay? Like just making sure that they're the driver of their vehicle, right?
Right.
We're just
I always jokingly call it lazy parenting because I'm like, my oldest could just like do things because I just sat back and was like, no, you can do that. And that's okay. And I was like, so I'm always like, lazy parenting was a win for me because she learned to do these things. And even like just little things like she like would learn to ask for batteries for certain things. Like she knew because she'd be like, something's wrong with this. And so it was like funny because my dad was like, I had her and then the woman he was dating at the time had a young boy, grandchild, and they were just like, this is messed up. And then my daughter was like, we need batteries for this. So he replaced the batteries. And then that little boy came over and was like, oh, well, now I want it. And he's like, you didn't ask for the batteries, right? And it's just like little things like that, like letting her like problem solve
problems.
yeah, like it's just so interesting. So I always jokingly say, like, lazy parenting is great parenting because you're allowing them to do things and trust that they can do it. And I've definitely had my fair share of wanting to step in. And now I'm trying to get my kids back into a place of not wanting me to do everything for them. And we homeschool. So I very often just, like you were saying, like learn through play. People will ask me, like, aren't you ever worried that they're behind? And I'm like, no, because they'll get it when they get it. And I'm allowing them to learn, like, for one, emotional regulation. Right now, it's like I want them to get those core things down and then we can process through the other stuff. And we still work on that. But I'm like, I want them to enjoy their learning and not lose that. And so we very much like try to foster that in our household. But yeah, it is just, it's funny because I think sometimes we think that we're not doing enough as parents if we're not stepping in. But the reality is, like, they gain so much when you don't. You just, like, kind of throw them to the wolves a little bit, but in a good way. Like, you're there to guide them. You're the safety net. However, sometimes they need that space.
Yeah. I think it's all in perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like someone on the outside, mother-in-law, a family member might view it as laziness, but when you stand confident knowing what your child needs and what your intention is behind it, then it shouldn't matter, right? Those
Right.
opinions outside shouldn't matter. I know my youngest is really into cooking and he will make himself, eggs and all kinds of things. And I had family members when he was younger, be like, oh my God, he's gonna like turn on the stove. And I'm like, he knows what to do. He's good. And then just be blown away to watch this like omelet come together.
Right. I still struggle with that. I have a friend whose daughter is 6. She's gonna be 7 this month. And she's got her cooking pancakes on her own, doing all these things. And I'm like, my oldest, like, I've got my oldest doing some things, just not like stovetop version. Yeah. So I'm like, there's nights where like we started working on like giving value for like pay. So I'm like, your chores don't necessarily, you don't get paid for that. But if you want to offer to make dinner one night, like I found like a simple meal she could make and she could earn some money for providing a service, right? Like, so I don't have to cook. And so now she'll be like, oh, can I cook dinner? And I'm like, even that little thing, but she like knows to like turn on the stove, but she can't always reach, so there's certain things that's like kind of difficult. But then I'm like, my friend's like, oh yeah, Mabel's just out here making and this and that. She's making pancakes for us. And she's got that. I'm like, really? She is? She's like, yeah. I'm like, I'm not quite there, but we had our girls and Girl Scouts together and she was the leader. And that was part of why I got them into it because she was that parent that I was always like, oh, I just want to be just like her. Like she was teaching them their knife skills when they were teeny tiny. Like these girls got so much out of it. And I was always like too afraid to do it. And so like I always aspired to be like her. I was like, she's like the goal. But I think like you said earlier, it's so different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And each child is very different.
That sparked the thought, like we did the baby led weaning and it's a polarizing topic anyway. And we don't visit my in-laws all that much. And I remember with my oldest, everyone was terrified to do the baby led weaning. They were like, she's going to choke, or if she'd cough, they'd be like panicked. And I'm like, let her be. She's all right. And when she was like 3, we had gone to visit his parents. And again, we have long stretches in between seeing them. And his mom was like spoon feeding her. And I was like, what is she doing? Like, what is she's been eating like this since she was 6 months old. Like, what is she spoon feeding her for? It is. I mean, that's one of those funny things where I can look back and be like, that's how parents want to step in and like overdo it when they don't really need to. I'm like, she could definitely eat on her own. She's like 3.
Right. Right. Yeah. And they mean well, right?
Yeah. I was like, why is she feeding her with a spoon? Like, she knows she can eat, right?
And sometimes it's like that moment. Well, you just, like they don't see each other a lot. This is their to bond. It's not like
we just go with it as long as nobody's getting hurt. And I did make sure, like when she was little, I made sure to let people know, like, you can't spoon feed her because she's learning to eat. By the time she was 3, she could eat however. So I was like, okay, it's not going to hurt anything because she knows how to eat properly. But yeah, when she was real little, I was like, don't do it. Don't spoon feed her. It's like on top of everybody. When you look back at, from your perspectives of being a teacher and being a parent coach and being a parent, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think parents face nowadays compared to 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago? I mean, at any time, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question because even just within I guess my teaching degree going on 25 years, I guess challenges I had in the classroom 10, 15 years ago compared to like 5 years ago are completely different. And I think it is parental stress. There was a few months ago an advisory sent out by the Surgeon General. I don't know if you saw the article, just really just stressing the need that parents have with managing stress. It's there's financial stress, there's cultural norms, there's worries. Like there's worries nowadays about school shootings and other things that necessarily around as much 15 years ago. But there's also technology, right? Technology, we live in a world of information, constant information. I think it's just like that mental fatigue. You can't pour from an empty cup, right? So if you're fatigued from the day of work and mental overload, then you have no willpower. You have no like, or very little, I should say, to kind of make those moments of connection. And I think a lot of families are overscheduled and, having dinner is not a common thing. It was years ago. And I think that that is contributing to it. A lot of children are growing up with screens too, and that's really just changing the evolution of of humans, right? And how we're evolving and our brains and the input that's coming into our brains versus the output is just crazy. So I think there's a lot of factors. I think there's a lot, but I think that parents are really stressed and need more support. And I mean, when I read that article, I was glad to see that the government is at least recognizing. So hopefully there will be some steps to support parents and kind of normalize. Like I would love for the world to everyone to have a parent coach in their village, right? Like that should just be a thing because it's needed.
It's interesting that you say that too, because there's also one, I think it was from last year from the Surgeon General that talked about, or maybe it was relatively recent, but it talked about, and it was post pandemic, which I thought was interesting. It talked about the epidemic of loneliness too. And so it's so interesting to see like stress is rising, but we're more isolated and feeling more alone. I say all the time, I feel like our society has done such a disservice to families anyway. It's so much work all the time. And I even have some people, that I work with that I'm always like preaching to them about like boundaries. I'm like, I get that you're a teacher and special education teachers are worked hard. And I know this, but you need to find some balance and some boundaries because we all want to do the best we can, but the reality is you can't do the best at everything all the time. And you have to be able to separate your work from your home life because, one shouldn't have to be on the back burner for the other either, especially if you like what you do or you're passionate about what you do, because obviously they want to help all of the children, right? And so it's like, but if you don't find that balance or some semblance of balance, obviously we go through seasons, right? Like right now, I have to find like those intentional times of where I can turn it on and where I can turn it off, but also knowing I am a little busier and life looks a little different. So where can we find that intentional time? And so I'm always like preaching to everyone about like, you need to take a break. You need to stop. Don't be up till 11:30 at night working. Come on now. And it's like we talk about it, but I don't think we really grasp just how serious it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to rest. It's not just physical rest, right? But it's
Right.
mental rest and social rest and spiritual rest. And like when we're not resting at all, then we're really just under resourced. And that's when we're not going to show up with the best side of ourselves in anything. Like you said, we just can't be great at everything. Something's going to be compromised. And so I think we're in this like you mentioned, this loneliness of parenting and feeling like I have to do it all and I need to do it perfectly because social
Right.
media is gonna, is like I need to post it, I need to post my life. And then so there's like this cycle of pressure, this added pressure. It's just not healthy. It's not serving you and it's not serving your family and the relationships that you have. And now's the time to really, really foundationally make those connections with your children because it goes so fast. It really does. I know that's cheesy and people say it all the time, but it's the truth.
It's hard, yes, because I think sometimes people think of that as being, like, invalidating, like, ignore how hard it is because it's gonna go so fast, and that's not at all the intention, like, intent versus impact, but it's like, you can have it hard and you can say it's hard, and you can be totally honest and transparent about that, and also know that even in the hard, you can show up intentionally.
I think it's like just normalizing everyone's needs in the home and building that emotional intelligence. I had a talk with my boys the other day. I'm like, I think I'm entering perimenopause. And I'm like, I feel sad today and I don't know why. This was 2 days ago. And they're like, what's going on? And they sat with me and they put their arms around me, like, don't be sad. And I'm like, I have no reason to be sad. Like all these blessings. I said, but something's happening. And they were like, well, what is perimenopause? We had this conversation about perimenopause, but I think normalizing what everyone's experience is and what they're going through and what they're feeling is not how I grew up, first of all, right? It was just, you just don't really talk about your feelings or your hardship. You just kind of push through, right? I have immigrant parents and you work hard and you just keep your mouth shut. And so I definitely am trying to teach my boys that that isn't necessarily the best option because what happens is it just you stuff it in and it's going to come out somehow.
Right.
And so it's better if we can talk about it, if we can have grace for each other, if we're going with apparently a lot of hormones in my house because I have two teen adolescents and whatever's going on with me. And so I'm like, we're just gonna have grace for each other and, figure this out together. But we're gonna talk about how we feel.
I've always been a verbal processor, so it's never been, like, uncommon for me to say things that are really TMI often, but I'm like, it is, it's who I am, whatever. But I think even taking it one step further of normalizing, because I think sometimes we normalize it in the sense of because everyone goes through it, then suddenly it doesn't matter. Well, okay, get over it because everyone's dealing with it. But it's really when you're normalizing it, like offering that space for yourself or for other people to not be okay and support them in that, not just be okay with not being okay, but actually hold space for each other and yeah, normalize it in a way that's like compassionate, not, stifling. Cause a lot of times I think there tends to be that negative connotation that, yeah, well, everyone has these problems, move on. And
Exactly.
it's not helpful. And it's funny that you said that. So I struggle with depression anyway, but I have a lot of stored trauma in my body. And so there's days where I'm like, I'm having anxiety or I feel sad. And my husband's like, why? What's going on? I'm like, nothing, literally nothing. There's nothing in my head. I'm not thinking anything that makes me sad. I just feel it in my body. And it took me a long time to get to that point, learning to feel those feelings and separate them from my thoughts. But that kind of leads me into my next question because you have mentioned a few times like perspective, thought work, the mindset, or when you were saying when they were younger and you were saying, what was it you said? How like you knew you needed more help because you were thinking like everything's happening to me and like everything's against me. Can you speak more to the thought process side of that or what that looks like? Because I started in mindset. So this all fascinates me and I love sharing mindset work because that's how I kind of got on my journey. So can you speak more to that process?
Yeah. It's definitely been a journey for me. You've probably heard some people are your cup is half full or half empty or however you want to look at it. And I think that perspective is something that we all carry, right? Based on like our programming and what our caregivers, like how they responded to stress or how they, communicated in those high intense moments or just hard times, right? Like growing up, I had my dad, it was, you never know what version you were going to kind of get, right? And so it was just very like kind of on edge. When things were good, they were great. When things are bad, they were bad. So I think a lot of that contributed to my programming of how to navigate through those harder situations. And obviously, like, with every experience, you learn and you grow. And in the beginning, it was always like everything was like the end of the world, right? When it's young, and then you work through that. But I think in regards to parenting, that those early years for me, it was doing that thought work and just really sifting through like what is it that I'm needing? Like if I'm overwhelmed or I'm feeling lonely and my husband walks in the door and it's like 8 o'clock and literally my baby's almost being launched in like a football because I need a break. Right. How do I communicate that to him without, resenting him or being angry with him or feeling like he doesn't care, doesn't want to be here? Those are just all like those thoughts that came up that were just false. Like poor guy, was like just really trying to provide for his family and do better for us. And me thinking that he was choosing that over us is like ridiculous, right? But I was very immature and emotionally, like I needed to do that work, and it was never modeled for me how to kind of express what I was feeling. I just keep it in, right? So I think over the years, just growing into that and learning that emotional intelligence, thankfully my husband is one that is very communicative and in expressing what he's feeling and like helping my guard to kind of like soften a little bit. So I think having a partner that I felt safe to kind of grow in that way has made a huge difference. And then of course, therapy, coaching, all of that. It's work. It's like anything you put work into, you need those resources to really do better for yourself. And I think being a parent coach too and helping my clients really do that work has also helped me, right? Identify just seeing it in other people has helped me also see things in myself. And I think that's the biggest thing is just learning what you're needing and how to communicate what you're needing in a way that's like not harsh. Like it's the way that we can do this effectively. We can honor each other, but it is a work in progress. It is something I talk to my boys about all the time. If they bring something up, like, is that a thought or is that a fact? And it just like kind of gives them that pause to really sift through. Like, am I grabbing to this thought because it keeps me safe? Because the confirmation bias to validate what I think it is, that's all around us.
Oh, yeah.
Or is it, is there something I can grab on that's going to serve me better?
Yeah, I have to do that with my oldest because I'll say, okay, you need to get off your computer. And she's like, I'm never getting it again. And I'm like, did I say that? That's my newest thing. I have to just say, did I say that? Is that what I said? You're just making this up in your head. Like, and actually there's a network marketing coach that says, he talks about red light stories versus green light stories. And just as we were talking about that, I was like, I should implement the red and the green light. I think that might help her resonate a little bit more because I used to do that when I worked. I'd have like a red, yellow, and green light for them to know when they could interrupt, like, or if they couldn't interrupt. And so that might be something that helps her like check it in her brain and want to honor your time. So I'm not going to keep you too much longer, but how do you differentiate when you're checking those thoughts and when it's turning more into toxic positivity and it's just ignoring what's really going on and just trying to just be positive?
I think it's just knowing your natural nervous system responses to things. My response to things, if I'm feeling, triggered or overwhelmed, is flight. So it's like book my flight to Mars. I'm out. Peace. So if I am feeling that urge, then I just I kind of like look inward a little bit and just maybe do some grounding exercise so that I can have some clarity. Or maybe I even ask, hey, we talk about this in 10 minutes, or I just give me a second to process because I don't want to jump into something, whether it's positive or negative, as far as my reaction, without really being sure of what I'm feeling. So it's almost like giving myself a pause button because, like, again, we got so much going on, right? We got information around us. There's like, you know, everybody needs you sometimes at the same time, it feels like. And so I think that, instead of just going with the first reaction, just allowing myself to have a moment to process and then making that decision more intentionally is really helpful. So that way I'm not going into like you said, that toxic positivity. I think that personally helps me. I need time to process information. Like that's just how my brain works. So my kids, I do tell them to give me some time, but what I've noticed, I have to tell, especially my oldest, a specific time so that he doesn't feel like I'm blowing him off. Like,
Right.
maybe 15 minutes, or let's talk about it at dinner, or let me go take a quick shower and then we'll sit down and talk, right?
Right.
Communicating that so that he doesn't feel like I'm blowing him off or not interested in that. But then it allows me that time to really like sift through the thoughts, right? And
Right.
is this more about me or is this more about him? Like that's coming up for me. Hopefully that answered your question. But I think
Yeah.
that pause is just so important.
What I personally love, like, I know a lot of people are like, don't argue through a text. But I've said before, sometimes depending on what the argument is over, I need to argue in a written way so I don't say things that I don't mean, and I need to be able to think it through before I write it out. And so whether it's a written one or a text, I think for me sometimes that's helpful because it allows me to articulate what I want to say before I'm just popping off because I'm a fight response. Like I will get worked up quick. And like I said, also a verbal processor. So actually, the other day, my husband is a huge Chiefs fan. And I wanted to show him some TikToks that I thought were hilarious and we could laugh together. And I went to show him one and he was like, hang on. And he puts his finger up and then he watches the TV. And as he's waiting for them to discuss whatever decision, I don't know, I'm not a football person, whatever decision they were going to make, I just looked at him. I sat there for a minute and I could feel it in my chest. And I looked at him and I said, I'm going to work really hard right now to think that you are telling me to hold on so that you can be fully intentional and present when you do look at me and not just more interested in football. And he's like, no, it's so I can be very intentional and present with you. And I was like, that's the thought that I'm going to continue to think here while I'm sitting here. And so sometimes, even as awkward and like seemingly laughable as it can be, even just saying things like, this is the thought that's going on. So I'm going to choose this one so that this is where I'm at right now.
You're going away.
Yeah, but I mean, it helped because like I was just able to be like, because in my head I was like, this guy wants to watch football. He won't even pay attention to my TikTok as if that matters. But it's kind of like back in the day when you'd watch like America's Funniest Videos together so you could laugh together. I'm like, sometimes I want to show you these TikToks. But I also know he's obsessed with football and his team was like, doing well, whatever. And so, yeah, sometimes it's for me, I think it's even just being intentional enough to know what's coming up and just say out loud, like, this is what's coming up for me. So, and if I need to say it in a silly way, just to like make us like lighten the mood a little bit, but also know what's coming up, like that can be helpful.
It's probably helpful for him too, right? To know
Right.
where your mindset is.
Right. Right. And that was the first time I had done it in that way. And so after I did it, I was like, I feel like that's something that's probably going to start being implemented a little bit more because I think it helped both of us because I was able to be like, this is how I feel. And I'm still a little irritated, but we can laugh it off.
For sure.
Is there something that you think parents generally that you've seen in your experience might overlook or might kind of fly under the radar? And is there something, if you could give them one piece of advice to take away from this podcast, if they are just struggling or in a hard season, what would you say to them? So I guess one, what should they be mindful of that they may not know? And two, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think first of all, in parenting in general, like once you think you got something, it's gonna change. And then once you think you got that, it's gonna change again. So why not just be flexible and open to changes and knowing that it's gonna change. Like it's there's moments of motivation and there's moments where things are chaotic, but I always say like that discomfort that's going to lead to growth, right? And then you'll have your moments of motivation again. And someone actually gave me that advice years ago when my kids were little. It was like, just know once you think you got it, it's going to change. And that always just stuck to me because I know this is like we're growing alongside our children, right? Like we're growing, we're changing just as much as they are. So just expecting that it's not going to be, the same or easy or hard or difficult all the time. Like there's,
Right.
sometimes when we're in those difficult moments, we think it's going to stay, right?
Right.
We catastrophize that our, child is going to end up living on the side of the road with the shopping cart, right?
Hey, if that's their choice, I mean,
And then the second part, which I think it the advice, I think that is to worry less, I know that's very typical for me, but I feel like a lot of parents do worry. And we live in a time where there's a lot of, scary things out there. But a lot of those are they're what ifs. They're like the probability of some of those things happening are very slim to none. And so we spend a lot of energy and time focused on them when really like we're missing out, right? We're missing out on those moments. I remember recently, a couple years ago, going on a field trip with my youngest to Epcot. And there were so many children that had air tags on them. And then here, we were just talking about taking children 20 something years ago all over Manhattan, right?
on the subway, no less.
It just got me thinking, like, wow, like we're really worried. We're really, really scared and worried. Like fear is really driving that parenting wheel.
You're not wrong because we went to New York to visit my brother, and I hadn't been there as an adult myself in charge of everything. And we had a good time, but we had a terrible time. My husband and I were so stressed trying to keep track of these kids, and I was wearing a tiny baby. Like, we were like looking back, I'm like, in Central Park, some of these parents must have been like, what is wrong? Because we were so high strung that we were like, the next time, like, we're just going to go with the flow and plan better. Like, because we were like financially strapped. We did not allot for enough of what New York City costs. And then on top of that, my husband is not a city guy. So he was stressed out, which then made me stressed out. And I was like, my baby was only 5 months old at the time. And then, having kids in the middle of all the people, it was so stressful. And like you mentioned the air tags, I'm like, dude, I probably would have like put air tags on them if I had even thought about it because it was so scary for us.
Right.
And I'm like, I grew up here. Like, I was around. Like, I mean, granted, I couldn't like go far, but like, because I was still relatively young, but like, it was fine. We were fine. Everything was fine. And looking back on it, it was fine.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, no offense if people, if that gives them a sense of peace
Right.
to use that. Uh, but I guess my point was more of like that energy that's kind of
No, yeah. Yeah.
like wasted almost on where it's taking you from those precious moments or just kind of being in the moment to begin, right?
That's my point. Yeah. Like, I totally get it because like what could have been like such a great, I kept saying, there's no magic. It was magical. And I'm like, well, yeah, looking back, I'm like, that's because I took away all the magic by being stressed out the whole time. Like when we finally did stop just to wander with no plan, that was the best day we had while we were there because we just got lost in the city, went underground, found the thing, popped out by Rockefeller. Like, it was great. But it was like all the other, like, because we spent like 4 days there. The other days that we really tried to plan things, I mean, I was crying at one point because I was so stressed out, not getting where I needed to be. And like looking back on it, like, it's so true. The amount of energy I put into trying to make it perfect or trying to make it what I thought it needed to be took so much time away from us. It, yeah, it's so true. And honestly, just in general, like the energy that we put into things that aren't serving our families. When I stopped like doing that, I don't know, I just had like a switch just flipped in my brain when I turned 30 and I was just like, eh. And like my dad and I'll have conversations where I'm like, you're just doing too much. Like I don't have the energy for that anymore. And when I stopped putting my energy into things that didn't serve my family, things just got so much better. So I completely agree with that advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with traveling, like lower your expectations.
Next time we were like, whatever the budget is, double it. Whatever the time is, double it. Like
Yeah.
stress off.
But my family, we travel a lot, and those experience, those moments, the memories, it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously things happen and there's stressful moments. That's, there's things that happen. But I think doing that inner work and regulating yourself as the adults, right?
Yeah.
It's it's gonna just spread out into everyone that's around. And so if we just focus on like the happiness and the time that we're spending together and not having expectations around it, then
Right.
we're going to enjoy ourselves more.
Right.
And it's a work in progress, right? Like I have moments where I'm like right now, my oldest is getting acceptances to college, and I'm like, do this, and we gotta do that, and we gotta wait. And then I have to like check myself. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
this is not me. Why am I worrying? This is here. I'm here. You're taking the lead. I'm here.
Right.
So it's definitely a work in progress, right? It's not something that uh, you know, is done and that's it. Like every change in your parenting and as your children get older, there's new experiences that you're gonna have to continue working on that mindset, on that
Right.
mindset and just, that the worrying, like the fear and just checking in with yourself. What
Sometimes it's like allotting for that time, like too, because when things are gonna act crazy or, like things are gonna get out of hand, like at some point life gets messy regardless. And like just in the terms of like vacationing, right? If I compared that to I took my oldest to nationals for gymnastics in Texas and they were 4 and 2 at the time. When we planned that one out, knowing that we had young children and we gave ourselves the time to travel. We were off the road by 5, 6 o'clock so they could just chill in the hotel, play, do what they wanted to do, stretch their legs. Like when we actually took the time to know, like, it's going to get crazy. Don't get like caught up in trying to cram. It made it so much easier. So it's like when you're going to worry or that there is something that bothers you, yeah, maybe you do use the air tag because it gives you that sense of peace, like you were saying. But sometimes knowing that you worry a lot, you can find ways to help combat that and then also do that thought work. So, like, if there are big things that like you're not going to get over today or tomorrow, you're afraid your kid's going to get stolen, give them the air tag or give them the little wrist thing that connects to you. Fine. Like, but then there might be other things where it's like, oh, my kid's throwing a tantrum. Maybe you work on not thinking that they're going to be like in jail because they're throwing a tantrum at 2 years old. And so that means that when they're 25, they're going to be like, locked up, or you can work on those things that are not like so pressing right now, but then find ways to combat that worry for the things that are pressing. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you come from that wiring from your past, like I do, then that work is definitely needed for sure.
It's not easy. Well, I know I've said I want to honor your time. So this time I really am. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I think it's been a really great discussion and it's been just a beautiful, well-rounded story. I loved hearing about your backstory and all the things. I think you've been very insightful. So with that said, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to my website, theparentlifecoach.com, and I always offer a free discovery session if you want to just chat about what's going on at home with your family. I'm also on Instagram at Parent Life Coach and Facebook. So yeah, thank you so much. This was a great opportunity for me to be a part of this. And I love meeting people that are like-minded, that like to support parents out there. So thank you for inviting me.
Remember, you are powerful, you are worthy, you are valued, and you are loved. Keep pushing, keep loving, and most importantly, keep believing in your amazing ability to empower your legacy.